Hello, everyone. We're live now. Welcome to Mail Manager's digital leadership discussion. Thank you all very much for taking time out of your day to listen. I know the sort of world and LinkedIn particularly has gone kind of webinar crazy. So we appreciate you taking time out of your day to attend our one, and hope you come out of this session with some actionable insights which help you sort of lead the digital sort of progression of within your own businesses. We'll get started. I think the event will probably last somewhere between kind of half an hour depending on questions. So we'll get started straight away. In terms of speakers, I'll be kind of just chairing today's discussion. I'm one of the directors at Mail Manager. Mail Manager is an Outlook add-in created by Arup to help companies get control of their email. And I'm delighted to be joined by Salla, Palos, the Director of Transformation Services at Microsoft, and Simon Evans, the Digital Energy Leader at Arup. Probably just to start things off, it'd be good for you to just introduce yourselves in terms of kind of who you are, what you do, beyond obviously just what's on the screen there. So Salla, do you mind just introducing yourself to the to the audience?
Yeah, good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to be on this panel. Thank you so much, Jacob, for inviting me. I work for Microsoft Internal Real Estate and Security Organization. I'm in our Center of Innovation, driving forward a new framework called the Digital Building Lifecycle. So it's a simplification of something that is a very big framework. And then here I have Helmi the cat. She has her own brand, so pardon me for having her around here. But yeah, we are
okay.
here to kind of poke holes into what the traditional industry is doing, and kind of opening discussion about what we might do together. I'm an open innovation enthusiast, so you'll probably hear a lot of that talk coming through. But it's a pleasure to be here. Thank you so much.
Very
Simon,
good.
you're next.
No problems, Salla, and no worries about the cat. I should add, I've got 2 children who could make an appearance at any time. I hope they don't, but you never know. So Simon, thanks for joining. A bit of background in terms of your role at Arup as well as others in industry.
Of course. So yeah, I was going to say, if you have children jumping on the keyboards, that's going to be a very dramatic moment on the the panel, isn't it? So Simon Evans, I work for Arup, as Jacob says. And my role is I look after digital within our energy sectors. And what that means is I look at how we can enhance and enable our design, delivery, and operations through the application of internet era technology, if you will. So I also, in addition to that, I'm quite closely linked and lead Arup's digital twin agenda. And through that, work very closely with the National Digital Twin Programme, a programme led by an organisation called the Centre for Digital World Britain for the last 18 months or so, and this I'm sure we'll touch on later. From a background perspective, so I'm a chartered mechanical engineer, also technology developer, and I'll be working in the energy sector, namely oil and gas, offshore wind, for quite a while.
Great. Well, thanks again, and great to have sort of both sides of the coalfaces that were involved in the discussion. So I'm going to probably just before we sort of go through what to cover, we'll use the Zoom chat feature in. For any questions which come up, please ask questions as we come through. That's always what makes these events worthwhile, for us as well as you. If I just make sure that's working okay, I'm going to put hi everyone on the chat, and if you can just respond back saying hi or anything which confirms that you've received that, that would be good. So yeah, any questions at all. This is supposed to be an informative but also an informal discussion, and a chance for you to ask questions to Simon and Salla. So yeah, please just ask them as they come through, and I'm sure we'll be able to cover them. Hi Susan, Tarleton, Paul, Trevor. I'm not going to say everyone's name now because I've seen how many's coming in, but it's good that that's working. So in terms of what we're going to cover, we're going to talk about acceleration for change to start off with. I've been sort of affiliated or linked to the construction industry for about 10 years, and definitely for large parts of that, just read and talked to lots of people who were frustrated about the kind of barriers and resistance to change. So just lots of people saying we need to change, we need to change, we need to change, but that sort of conversation not necessarily moving very far forwards. We're then going to move on to why a digital twin isn't a silver bullet, and hopefully just break down what is undoubtedly a massive topic in industry into some kind of fairly helpful kind of use cases, and I suppose hopefully taking just a little bit more of a pragmatic view on that. And then we're going to talk about information value, which I think is really relevant in today, whether we're talking about delivering projects, winning projects, avoiding disputes, lots of things. Lots of the kind of challenges in our industry essentially come down to how we manage information. So they're the things which we're going to cover. And please, as we go through this, just ask any questions. If you want to answer any questions, then feel free to have a go as well. But but please ask any questions through the Zoom chat feature. In terms of the pandemic being an accelerator for change. Now, I know there's kind of different opinions on this and different opinions on why there was maybe some resistance to digital change before, and investment in IT. I'm sure we've all worked in businesses where there's a reluctance or a bit of a pessimism around investing in technology. So Simon, probably good to start with yourself and just understand your take on whether you think this is true or not, and if so, why?
Absolutely. So yeah, I completely agree with this. And for me, the pandemic has been the first real driver for organizations to digitally transform that we've seen. And what I mean by that is prior to it, the pandemic happening, of course, organizations were looking at Industry 4.0, they're looking at digital transformation. It was on everyone's lips in the boardroom, but also was often seen as lip service, and it wasn't really resonating and happening throughout the business. But then with the pandemic and as you say, the forced or enforced or the need to adapt and change, we've seen dramatic things happen that I don't think anyone would have suspected before. So, for example, kind of citing a Microsoft product, as Salla's here as well, we worked with organizations who were planning to roll out Teams, Microsoft Teams, in about a 6 to 9 month period, but then were forced to do so in about 6 days instead. And people just adopted and adapted as much as possible, which I think is fantastic. It's kind of reset the bar on what can and can't be done, and the tolerance levels of individuals. But at the same time as well, what that doesn't necessarily look at is those who are now more digitally isolated because of it. So what I mean by that is people who maybe don't have the right broadband or internet connections, or are from an age demographic where they're not so familiar or keen on technology, or just any demographic that they're not so keen on technology. And now they've kind of found themselves slightly isolated from a world that's moved forward at a pace that we've not really seen before. So I think it's a kind of a double-edged sword that, yes, absolutely, it's been a huge accelerant for digital transformation at an individual level. For us as consumers, Zoom like this, now ask people 18 months ago if they knew what Zoom was, 1 in 5 probably wouldn't, or 1 in 5 would, depending on what your status. I'm just kind of making it up on the spot a bit there. But now fast forward, and we're much more wholesale adopting it to individual organizational level, but probably people are getting left behind. So that's kind of my opening thoughts to that, really.
Yeah, no, thanks, Simon. And Salla, over to you.
Yeah, thank you. I like it that Simon brought up Industry 4.0, because I was going to mention that as well, that AECO industry has been kind of figuring out what would be the roadmap for digitalizing and joining the other industry verticals in Industry 4.0 and adopting to AI and machine learning and all the good stuff that we are developing. And overall, when thinking about the AECO industry, people think that it's a very manual and analog industry. Is actually very high tech. So the digital transformation has existed for a very long time, but due to the fact of how many tools people are actually using and how many different stakeholders are working on the same projects that have very, very long lead times, that's where the fragmentation is slowing down the digital transformation. And when the pandemic hit, it had to be very instant. And that's where the adoption to digital construction happened within days, and people started adopting to shared platforms and common data environments and everything that the industry has been trying to push, but has been slow at adopting. So overall, I'm kind of sad to say I'm glad that this pandemic happened now, that the AECO industry needs to accelerate and move over from Industry 1.0 to Industry 4.0 and see what the opportunities are for people. And that's where the transformation, the change start to happen. It's people, and it's people as us as individuals that change. We have to change our habits and our ways of working. And that way we start to actually change the processes that then deliver the business outcomes. But it's never the anonymous organization that changes, it's always the people.
Yeah, no, I think I suppose that's very true in terms of when change becomes challenging as well. The question has just come in, which was something I was going to ask anyway. So on that grounds, great question, Eva. Thank you for bringing it up. Which is, how do you see the leadership role and importance in this situation, especially given that we're going into digital transformation basically due to the pandemic? So, Simon, how do you kind of see the role of leadership in this?
Absolutely. So I think that's a great question. And both Salla and myself, we work in digital. Everyone now wants to be our friend. It's the absolute thing you want to do. So if you're in a position of leadership, everyone kind of wants to be involving you in conversations, etc. But a lot of what we see still across industry is lots of platitudes and hand waving when it comes to technology. Kind of people go, yay, digital, amazing, this is going to solve all our problems, which is not great. And actually that causes a lot of confusion, because where there's a lack of awareness or education, people are hungry to learn more. And if that gap is filled with unicorns, let's say, it's not going to be good. So from a leadership perspective, it's really on organizations like ours, and many of the people who listen to this call, try and cut through that really and talk about the tangibles and the use cases associated with it, rather than just kind of say, yeah, digital, Industry 4.0, wave your hands, it's fantastic, which is what we have seen being done for the last 5-6 years in various forms. And I think a big part of that, in my view, would be a bit of a mantra that it's a journey, not a destination when it comes to these things, that there's no, as we'll talk about next, silver bullet that you can just buy and deploy and you've changed your organization. It's more than that. It's going to be a slow journey, and the journey in most cases is not actually a technology problem, because the tech's there, it's been there for ages. It's pretty much always going to be some type of people and process issue. And that's the heart of it that we as leadership need to be addressing instead.
So do you think some of it's actually down to how the sort of digital leaders communicate, even inside their own businesses?
Hugely, yeah, absolutely. I think the way it is presented and communicated by digital leaders or leaders is going to be key for the adoption. What we've seen success in the firms that we work with is where not only do the leadership buy in to the idea, because they have to, because it's, you'd be silly if you weren't saying digital's the future, but they're also deeply understanding it as well, or make strives towards understanding it, or surrounding themselves with people who do understand it. And therefore you can see at the heart of the organization, change is being made, rather than just being something that's talked about because you have to.
Okay. And Salla, I suppose from your side, it kind of, how do you see the role of leadership when it comes to, for example, industry working with software vendors?
Yeah, good one. I think that's the opportunity for a kind of shared leadership. So there is a need for top-down leaders to kind of mandate the digitalization and digitization. But then if it's only a top-down, then it's kind of forced on people. So it needs to be the coming from bottom up as well, and sharing the experiences, sharing why there is a need for digitalization, so that when the top leaders are thinking about the financial perspective and thinking about the risk mitigation, etc., they understand that who are the end users of the tools. They can do their work much better than with the traditional tools, so that they need to be supporting those that are the end users overall and being on board. But like Simon said, that there is a need for using very clear terminology, because there is a lot of terminology, especially now that digital twins are entering the market within the AECO industry, and a lot of keywords are actually being used quite wrong, even in fact. And then when thinking about the AEC industry and then the O industry, we are mixing basically construction industry with finance. And there is no common language necessarily bridging those two together. But data is the common language, and that can be democratized and shared and then embedded into various different platforms and solutions. So overall, if we can ensure that the data that is being exchanged is actually trustworthy and precise, then we can already mitigate some of the risk that comes from the wrong use of terminology. A good example is like a term greenfield. The same language is used in software development, but it means completely different than what it means for the AECO industry, and the real estate owners might be kind of in the crossfire that when talking about greenfield projects, oftentimes they might be talking about tenant improvement and adding a sensor into an office space. But when you talked about a greenfield project to an architect, they are thinking about regional development, and the budget scale is completely different. It goes from $20 sensor to like $20 million project. So there's need for clarifying a lot of the terminology and renewing it so that we don't use the old terminology to describe something new.
Okay, that's interesting. I can see another question's come in as well, which I think is one for. Oh, there's a couple. So I'm going. There's a couple of questions here. There's one which we're going to come on to. But Simon, have you got anything to add to what Salla just said?
Yeah, I'll add a little bit, and then I can see that some great questions being asked as well. I think it's exactly as Simon was saying, and building on that, a big part of it will be that if you are going to try and get people to adopt any type of technology or transform, it has to be easier than the alternative of not using it. And what we've seen is people deploy ridiculously complex systems or processes that no one can get their head around without a significant amount of training. And although it could be the best thing in the world, no one's going to ever adopt it, and it falls flat. So that's kind of the thing I was going to share.
Great. There's a question here from David. Thanks, David, for bringing it up. Why is it, do you think, that some of the biggest companies have such poor IT systems? He's worked in some regulated, different companies and countries, and feels that the pandemic has kind of forced companies to maybe invest in things which they were less inclined to do. I don't know. I don't know if either of you are seeing that. Simon, if you take that, and then Salla, just feel free to add anything to it.
Absolutely, and regulated. I mean, a big part of the energy sector is quite regulated, particularly our nuclear market. And I fully resonate with that. And there's often a challenge with those regulated sectors that they are slower to adopt pace of change, and the default response is often no, before listening to kind of alternatives. And there's various reasons for that, and security obviously being a big part of it. And I very much agree that there is a bit of a risk now that office infrastructure in actual physical office might not be as invested in. But if anything, I think we've seen that the pandemic has shown the need for organizations to constantly invest in their IT. Historically, it's probably been seen in a similar way to property maintenance. You know, if you live in a block of flats or a house, people don't really paint the outside of the house or refelt the roof or stuff until something really bad happens, and then you get hit with a massive lump sum bill. And you see this with heritage buildings as well. Whereas if you were to do the incremental maintenance, of course, you wouldn't have such a problem. IT was probably seen like that by many. For those organizations who were a bit more forthcoming in their investments when we were forced to transition across into home working, a lot of them just flicked the switch and carried on as normal. And without kind of obviously talking too much about Arup, we were one of those organizations. We just carried on, and not much really impacted us at all. Whereas I know firms that we did work with had the opposite, where they didn't really invest and all hell broke loose. People weren't able to access anything, or as we saw in some markets, people were panicking to open up access to their servers in order to get access from home, but it was being done in probably a not cyber secure way. So I'm wondering if we will see in 6 months, 12 months time, a raft of data breaches being announced that have happened because people have gone, open up the doors, we need to get access to our staff, and have been done with like the default admin password, for example, and then people have just walked straight into the organization. So yeah, there's some interesting challenges ahead maybe.
And we talked about kind of companies, being forgotten or left behind. I mean, what does that like? I think again that's something which sort of can sometimes come across as like almost like a bit of sort of, I don't know, either a blanket statement or just something which lots of software companies say to sell more software. So I don't know, like what does that look like in your experience, Simon?
Sorry, if you did Salla or Simon then. Sorry,
Simon. Sorry,
sorry, that was my.
Sorry, I thought it was a Wi-Fi drop there, but that's okay.
Yeah,
So
no,
yeah,
that's all right. I was looking at thinking, yeah. So I think there is definitely a part of it being it could be seen as sales patter to try and stop organisations getting left behind. At this point, I think organisations have very much realised the need for investment and have done what's required to continue operations. Whether that investment curve continues or we're going to see some outstrip others and people get left behind again will be interesting. But reflecting on that, particularly about the left behind, one thing that I find pretty humorous right now is, I'm not sure if it's the same across all of the globe, but in the UK, if you were to phone up certain organisations, typically utilities companies, telco companies, or any service desk, you hear a message that says, due to COVID-19, we are having problems with staff numbers or etc., or we're unable to give our staff access from home. And it makes you think, like, how have you not sorted that out a year later? Like, a lot of organizations have kind of worked that out, but obviously others haven't, or it's being used now as an excuse for various things. Who knows? But that's maybe a different question altogether.
Salla, how about yourself? What does being forgotten look like?
Well, think about this from like a construction point of view. There's probably a lot of legacy systems that still exist or coexist with the new systems, and they are oftentimes not integrated together. So you have stuff that is on-site, so you have the on-site servers, but then you might have something already mitigated to the cloud. And as long as people are kind of struggling or juggling between the traditional or the old versions and the old systems, and then trying to adapt to the new ones, it's a huge investment, depending on the company size, or not even depending on the company size, but it is a huge investment overall to invest into IT structures. And when thinking about how long have we actually had good cloud services, cloud as a platform, cloud as an infrastructure, for construction industry, it hasn't existed very long time. And then adding on top that a lot of the construction projects that are delivered, they are delivered in regions that there is no infrastructure to begin with. So the industry has been kind of waiting for the 5G networks and the fast speed internet that then is available in very remote locations. A lot of the construction projects, they don't happen in downtown areas of metropolis areas. So it's a kind of the infrastructure hasn't been necessarily ready before, and now everyone is trying to hurry up to kind of catch up on what the current technology is capable of supporting. Yeah, I guess that now it's kind of the companies that are struggling and trying to go through the digital transformation, they need to really deep dive into what their digital strategy is and what kind of digital core they want to build. Because then when thinking about like the cloud services and what kind of software you're using and what is that software actually built on, you might be looking into like multi-cloud solution for your digital core. So that needs to be taken into account as well, that where do you want your data to be hosted, and where are others hosting the data that is related to your project as well. So it's a very multifaceted question, that how should AECO industry companies actually move forward, and what is their adoption? How do they actually adopt, and how do they build their digital core, and digital strategy, because they're not necessarily the IT professionals. They're the customers that need the support from the professionals to make those good decisions.
Yeah, no, I think that's really key, especially as you say, when it kind of comes to making decisions and not getting caught cold, which perhaps happened 12 months ago or so. So moving on to the next thing here, why a digital twin isn't a silver bullet. So I think sometimes we were discussing off air yesterday that the industry generally gets very bogged down in kind of definitions and what things mean rather than sort of what are the tangible outcomes really. So one of the things, I suppose, it'd probably be a good place to start is to just understand but your opinion on the sort of misconceptions around a digital twin and kind of what it almost what it definitely isn't. Salla, could you sort of kick things off?
Yeah, thank you. So overall, I've seen a lot of discussion around digital twins and how it's used as a synonym with building information models or with point clouds or things that already have existed in the industry for decades now. And digital twin is kind of becoming a veneer for something that already exists. So that there's a missed opportunity to really critically think that what is digital twin as an emerging framework and an emerging technology, and think about why it's not a silver bullet. I don't think the digital twin is necessarily the destination yet. It's the beginning of a journey that is going towards the digital truth. And how I think about digital twin is that it has different components that make up the digital twin. So there can be the component of a reality capture, the point cloud, building information model, IoT networks, and IOA networks, and all the data that we are capturing and collecting from the built environment, but also from the natural environment. And that way, the digital twin, it needs to be something that is based on the end user's needs, and they choose what are the components that they want in their digital twin. But the components themselves, they need to be transoperable. And I use that word transoperable instead of interoperable because it needs to be consumable on any hardware that the end user wants to use for consuming the data that they need to consume. And the data can be in business intelligence dashboards, or it can be a 3D model that is enriched with a lot of live data or just on-demand data and create it into a visual data experience. So overall, there's a digital twin is something that hasn't pre-existed, and now as an industry, we really need to look at it and not try to replicate something from the past and create a more beautiful veneer for what already is in the market, but really critically kind of come together to discuss what is a digital twin and what are the components of it, how do we plan to use it, and what is it best used for from business point of view, but also from the user experience point of view, and that way arrive at good solutions. Because I would hate to see similar thing happening in the digital twin as what happened to BIM 20 years ago.
Very much agree with that. And I kind of, it's interesting, isn't it? Because I think one helpful way of looking at it is that a digital twin is more like a methodology than a product or technology. And what I mean by that is there's not a single product you can buy off the shelf to give you a twin, just like there's not a single product you would buy to write a word processing document or to make a 3D model. It's just a constellation of technologies that come together. And that's why from my perspective in Arup, we see it more helpful to consider it as a digital twin approach, and that methodology really just talking about how you can use data more effectively through the lifecycle of a project to provide and unlock value and enable things that you were hearing talked about from AI, ML, etc. But it's about having those two worlds, the physical and digital world, converging. So I fully agree with that. And I think the other interesting part to build on top of it is that twins are not new in any capacity. The earliest examples of deploying them were the Apollo 13 missions, which were 50, 60 years ago, when they called it digital mirroring at the time. And since then, we've seen the evolution through the manufacturing and aerospace sector, who've been big users of it for the last 20 years. My background in energy, we've been looking at it for the last 10 years. And it's really the built environment that's woken up to it in the last 3-4 years. And then you've seen radical movements such as the Digital Twin Consortium, the National Digital Twin Programme, which are talking really aspirational but also tangible language around how you can bring twins together, you can connect twins, and that ecosystem of connected twins will provide value for society and business, etc., that none of us can yet comprehend. So it's very much, yeah, journey, not a destination, methodology, not a technology.
And what do you think of the kind of examples of this, of like a digital twin, the concept of a digital twin being well understood, well applied, and driving either better decisions or more tangible kind of outcomes, Simon?
I think it's down to the positive and negative parts being on how they are attempted to be implemented. And what I mean by that is the most successful implementations come when they are answering particular use cases to address a particular challenge or problem, rather than just being this unicorn that, you know, a fully autonomous system that will solve all your problems and cure all challenges. And when you address it for bound use cases, and the ones we typically see success in are typically around some type of asset optimization or improvement, you know, so classically things like how can you do predictive maintenance and use that to inform somehow the operation of the site or the plant or facility or the energy usage is where a lot of it's coming out and being successful. What we're not really seeing yet is how you can bring twins into the earlier starts of the life cycle successfully. So design and build, for example, not just the operate, but I think we're going to get there. The negative aspects will really be when they are sadly oversold, which happens all the time. You know, you'll just have to type into Google the word digital twin, and the top 10 companies are all quite significant tech companies with large marketing budgets, which is great. But again, being a methodology, not a technology, you can't just buy one, plug it in to solve your problems. It's not going to work.
There's been a question which has come in from Chris Scott, which I think sort of leads on to the discussion quite well. Salla, is there anything you want to add to what Simon's just mentioned at all?
Yeah, I agree with Simon that there is no off-the-shelf solution that is the turnkey solution or one-stop shop for all. It's more of a mindset and a methodology that everyone needs to adapt to, and that kind of requires people to start thinking about the processes and how do we actually deliver or build the digital twins, because it's not a single solution. It's not like that silver bullet that can solve all the world problems, but it can if it's built correctly from multiple components and then used for decision making, precisely for avoiding the wrong decision and avoiding cost and avoiding unnecessary investments. Because when thinking about the use of digital twins, if building information model shows the geometry and technical performance of the building that is modeled and designed with BIM, then digital twin can bring in the components of what is surrounding the building itself as well, and what are the end users bringing into the mix as well. Because once you introduce people into the building, they start changing things immediately and messing things up. So that's what I'm hoping for digital twin, that instead of making a decision with a very narrow set of data, digital twin can really pre-process the data into information that then becomes the intelligence needed for knowledge. And that way, when making decisions about like what is the rotation of a building, then if you understand what is the microclimate in that region or in that a lot of land that you're developing, then you can already resolve a lot of issues that you would have to compensate with HVAC systems, etc. Because you might be like facing the direct heat gain from the sun every day and then running your cooling system at the maximum power. But if you rotate your building a little bit, understanding the microclimate in that location based on the data that you can feed into your digital twin, then you might arrive at a different decision, and that way like tie into your sustainability story, etc. So there's a, like, how I look at digital twin is that it needs to be like a one input, multiple outputs kind of a solution, and really driving people's educated decision making.
So questions coming from Chris Scott, which is part of the acceleration in adoption is being driven by the increased importance of corporates' net zero targets, particularly since the announcement of the UK's 2050 targets, and being able to accurately measure the environmental performance of buildings. Is a kind of increased adoption being driven by the requirements of market funding rather than just the pandemic? I think that's a really good point. Simon, do you want to give Chris a response to that?
Yeah, absolutely. I fully agree, Chris. I typed sim in the chat window that, yeah, please don't take our first comments as saying the pandemic is the only driver for technology change, because that's categorically not true. There are many factors for sure. And I think the interesting part is that tech can have a double-edged sword when it comes to net zero. So, for example, those who've been following the news today, Coinbase just had an IPO. Coinbase is a big crypto coin and other kind of asset exchange platform, and then linking that to crypto coins, and Bitcoin being the most relevant one. You hear the stat now that the energy usage to mine Bitcoin is equivalent to Argentina, which is ridiculous. So not only are we saying, yes, tech is being driven to reduce and monitor targets for energy consumption, how to get to net zero. On the flip side, in a consumer world, we're also using more energy in order to adopt tech, because we fancy Bitcoin, for example. Now, I think from my perspective, energy sector being one of the biggest parts of the decarbonisation, the net zero story, in order to get to net zero, we of course have to fundamentally decarbonise what we're doing. A big part of that realisation is that you will need technology to do so. And talking basically and adding on to what Salla was saying there around digital twins in particular, it's also acknowledged that digital twins and the use of them, that kind of convergence of the physical and digital worlds, will be a big and massive factor in the success of getting to net zero targets. And then kind of the final flavour I'll add on to that is that when we think about that more broadly, what digital twins mean for assets, and in the context of net zero, there are already conversations in place at the moment around how the value of data might be recognised on the balance sheet for organisations. And we've seen studies being done around that over the last couple of years. Now, if we take accounting standards, for example, might take 5, 6, 8, 10 years to update, and they're already in discussions on how you value data, will that mean in 5, 6 years you'll be required to put data as a value on the balance sheet? And therefore, what will that mean for an organisation? But in the addition to that is, we've also heard that certain organisations, so finances, insurers, for example, are saying that they would expect a building to have a digital twin at some point in the future if they were to insure it or finance it. So yes, absolutely, technology might be, or organizations might be forced to adopt technology, because otherwise the asset becomes unsellable, unappetizing for a tenant in like a commercial real estate, or unfinanceable in the first place, which is an interesting concept.
Yeah, I also think that the sort of commercial real estate sectors, it's going to have quite a big. It's probably going to be more disruption there, I would have thought, than anywhere else almost, which will possibly have some sort, or not anywhere else, but anywhere else in the sort of AEC industry, which will probably have some form of a kind of ripple effect, I guess. Salla, on the I suppose the slightly more negative kind of side of things, we've talked about some positive examples of a digital twin where it's kind of well understood. Have you ever experienced any sort of on the flip side of people sort of starting out with quite lofty ambitions and ending up disappointed? Like, can you relate to that at all?
Oh yeah, of course. Being a transformation leader, that's my everyday bread and butter. Having lofty ideas and then peeling them back to something that is more operational and tangible for people in everyday operations. But I think that overall, the industry needs the big vision and the disruption, basically, in the most positive way. With using that term, that incremental improvements, they're not enough anymore, and like as Simon described, that if finance organizations are going to be requesting and mandating digital twins from the built environment industry stakeholders, and now is the time to start building up that readiness, because there's an opportunity for recycling what is already delivered into the built environment. And when thinking about the how much energy is consumed and how much heat is then produced as the side effect of like a cryptocurrency mining, etc., then why not have the discussion that how might we actually use what is left behind for something that is needed already in the built environment. Now think about the need for heating. Everyone needs heating and everyone needs cooling in their homes and offices and the buildings overall. So it's a kind of an engineering problem that what might we do with what we have in our hands, and not see it always as a waste or as a negative thing, but see it as an opportunity that what might we do with what we have. And that's the same thing with the pandemic. That is, there's the famous saying that when life gives you lemons, make lemonade. But like, let's make lemon cake and some other things as well. That instead of always focusing on the dark side of things and the negative side of things, see them as an opportunity as a new resource.
Great, really, really good points. Thanks, Salla. Thanks, Simon. If we move on to the final part, so the I and BIM. So obviously, naturally, a lot of the conversation focuses around data, which is important. I think the point you just made, Simon, around data sitting on a balance sheet. So that's a I don't know if it's like a fascinating or a scary concept. I can imagine accountants pulling their hair out anyway. But in terms of the information value in BIM, I think probably it would be useful to get your opinions on maybe the types of information which people sort of possibly don't naturally prioritize or take seriously. I guess, you know, the model, the contract, that sort of thing, you know, you would expect companies to, but what's your own experience of that, Simon?
So I think this is interesting because BIM, or building information modeling, or I think more broadly information management, which I'm sure our audience are very familiar with, is kind of been an interesting journey for organizations, particularly in the label of BIM. And most of the fascination is on 3D geometry, for example. And that's kind of seems to be what it is, metadata associated with 3D geometry. Now, of course, what I'm not saying there is that is all BIM is at all, or information management. But because of the way, you know, industry adoption has been, the way it's been promoted, the type of information that people take most seriously is that the other types typically seem to slightly fall by the wayside. And we're in this interesting space where, although we might be trying to adopt more digital approaches, the data that would be developed in an asset chain design and the BIM information is typically held within the design phase only, maybe creep into construction, but never really goes into operations. So the interesting part there being that many reasons for why that happens, the information is taken seriously at one stage of the project, which is a minor part of the cost and the lifetime, but where 90% of the value or the cost and operational life of the asset sits, none of that information is really carried forward or accessed, which is a challenge for sure.
Salla, from your point of view, do you see kind of people having a different approach to based on the type of information they're trying to kind of manage on a project? And do you think some's completely neglected and some isn't, or do you think companies do have a sort of genuinely holistic approach to getting their house in order, as it were?
I think overall, when thinking about the built environment industry, data is oftentimes very fragmented and siloed, and there's so much of it that it's not relevant for every stakeholder, but it might be super relevant for a specific role in the overall project. And I've been toying around with the idea that what if the overall business model of the built environment industry was tweaked a little bit so that the owner, for like real estate owner, wouldn't have to collect all the data, the terabytes of data at the end of the project and store it somewhere that they don't need for their operations, but others might need when the building goes into tenant improvement or renovation and retrofit projects, or for like a additional building projects. But overall, how might we actually develop like a services network that the original stakeholders that designed the building and went through the heavy thinking process of why they chose certain components, why they chose the certain geometry, and why they designed or engineered the building a certain way, that they can keep all that data and be the authors of that data, even if the real estate owner would own the digital version of their building. But then where is the opportunity of buying more services during the operations phase for the real estate owner? That business model doesn't exist, or I haven't come across that, because I would love to engage the original project teams into giving advice and being the technical advisor when the building is online and it's being measured with IoT sensors, and there might be IoA sensors to see how people are changing the built environment, and exposing that data for the original experts and ask them that, what do you see in this data? How is my building actually performing? What should I actually do to keep it performing as high as it can at as low cost as possible? Because the real estate owners, they are finance organizations. They care about the money, but they don't necessarily understand the technical side of things. But then they make the decisions of like when do they choose to invest in the improvement projects, and like sadly thinking about the history of the built environment, oftentimes buildings are used until they are basically rubbling down. And that's when you have to do like a second investment into rebuilding the building that you have, instead of just making the updates and upgrades to keep it performing and lengthening its technical life cycle. So overall, when thinking about all the information that is being created through the digital building life cycle, maybe there is an opportunity for rethinking what kind of digital services might we actually start producing for the built environment, and that way the earning logic would be that there is like a steady flow of money back into the original project teams that are the serious experts in that specific project, and not just do a one-time project and then hoping that someone will take care of it. So that's how I've been thinking about this.
In terms of common data environments, the natural part of the discussion around BIM really, and obviously we didn't get onto the kind of tools which may or may not get neglected, but common data environments are often kind of seen as one place for everything. But I think with the introduction of things like Teams, as well as probably just a little bit of reality around what a CDE is for and what it isn't for, bit like the discussion around the digital twin really. Simon, when you're working on projects, what's been your or what's your kind of outlook approach for whether a CDE is sort of one place for absolutely everything, or whether that isn't the case?
I think it's kind of partly the right tool for the job, what's trying to be achieved, and in the context of BIM, a CDE is very relevant for exchanging design information, documents, drawings, CAD files, etc. And everyone working within one environment, having a federated model that all parties can interact with. But in other aspects of kind of the asset lifecycle, it wouldn't be the same CDE that would be used for that. Typically that would be an electronic document management system, an EDMS, that you'd use through that part of the design project. Whereas you go to later stages and you start getting IoT information or historian information, that's stored somewhere else. Again, maybe common or not, pick your name for it, data lake, data swamp, etc. But I think the key part being that it's going to always be around a constellation of technologies that connect together and integrate, and that constellation could be owned by various people across the life cycle. So with the prevalence of cloud services, of course, no one really puts their own on-prem servers in place anymore in case there's particular reasons to. And you'll have a lot of SaaS or software as a service solutions that might be providing parts of it. So you could find that your data footprint, your digital footprint, is spread quite significantly across a number of different places, which of course creates another issue for your CISOs and an information security perspective, particularly when you see the prevalence of data breaches happening a bit too frequently, if you will. But I think it comes back to that it will be a CD will be a one place for a certain group of things, depending on what that is. But there's going to be a constellation of these systems that talk with each other and interact.
There's been a question coming. There's been a question from Eric, which has come in, which is there an opportunity to use IoT sensor data as a metric to validate design decisions or the performance of installed systems? Essentially, architects and manufacturers committing to post-occupancy SCEPs with monetary penalties or rewards. I don't know who wants to. If either of you want to, it's quite a tough question, that is. I don't know if either of you want to take the lead on that one.
I think it's a brilliant question, and also what we'll see happen. I mean, if we look at the evolution of or towards firstly using SaaS, software as a service, and people being like, oh, I don't know if I trust that, paying a monthly fee for something. But then the evolution of kind of value-based pricing or outcomes-based pricing, where yes, you are incentivized on the success of the end asset rather than just building it, for example, is a really novel way of charging. And we do see firms doing that. You know, you have examples of organizations saying that they will want a X amount of cost if every whatever they save you, and then making a killing that way. Of course, there's another side to that of how do you prove that's the value that's been saved and effectively achieved, because both parties are incentivized to do the different thing. You know, oh, I've saved you loads of money. No, you haven't. I would have saved that naturally. But I think it's a great question. Yeah, why not? I mean, it just takes one ambitious project to try it, and then it becomes something that you can talk about and build up from there.
Yeah. Okay. I think that's a good attitude to have as well. You know, why not? Salla, what are your thoughts on? There's obviously naturally a lot of focus on external collaboration and sharing information better with external parties and having better standards across industry. What are your thoughts on kind of, I suppose, the emphasis of internal collaboration and kind of what good internal collaboration looks like?
Yeah, that's a good one, and that's where like democratization of data comes to play. That opening up the silos that might exist in an organization, because people have certain scopes that they are managing, and they are very focused and dedicated to their work, and not oftentimes maybe realizing that how compassion and empathy could help the organization thrive. But it would require them to share the data that they are managing and hosting, instead of thinking that it's their baby, and if anyone tries to touch it, it's kind of interfering what they are assigned to manage. So overall, internal openness, transparency, but also external. I don't know exactly what would be a hyper secret about a built environment, unless you're talking about the physical security devices and that design. But then if a space is something that anyone can walk into, and it's something that everyone can experience, then why not share the data and use that for leveraging it for a meaningful discussion about what are the end user experiences that people want, and how those might be delivered in the physical environment, and then look for opportunities to harmonize. So looking into the data that is collected, there is always the question that I keep asking people, that why are you collecting the data? What is the outcome that you are planning on creating based on the data that you're collecting, so that they're not collecting the data just for the sake of collecting, and then creating dark data that nobody uses and nobody knows that it exists, but really opening up as much as possible and exposing it to people, because every time that someone gets their hands on something and they get to tinker with it, innovation starts to happen. And that's the point of view that I take into internal collaboration and information management purposes, that how might we actually spin the innovation flywheel, instead of assigning innovation to a specific person and say that, here you go, you get paid every day to be the innovator, now go. And then that person is left alone to be the inventor and the innovator, but really harnessing the knowledge and the experience and the enthusiasm that everyone has in an organization to drive the better outcomes much faster. So I'm hoping that will resonate with organizations, that transparency and openness will deliver much better revenue and outcomes.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point on sort of almost understanding, like, if you've got data, why why is it there? What business outcome is it linked to? Because I think you also hear lots of stories when it comes to BIM of mass, almost like massively high expectations of the actual output of documents which don't ever get used, not a lot of which don't ever get used. So I think that's an important question to answer. So one's come in from Tarleton. Thanks for the question, Tarleton. When working on an evolving tech stack in a mid-sized company, how do you get engagement from people in multiple departments, and who should be taking the lead on implementation? Can you talk to the dynamics of top-down versus people trying to evolve each other's work? Salla, we'll go to you for your thoughts on that one, if that's okay.
Yeah, thank you. And that's a very good question for Tarleton. I think that overall, to get engagement from people is personalizing the technology. That what are the benefits for the individuals that you want engagement from, and then being very consistent in communications. And doing it every day in small pieces, so that people are not overwhelmed with like once a year big blast, but something that is kind of embedded into the organizational DNA, so it becomes the way of working and the everyday life in that organization, that people feel that they have a stake in, so that they don't feel like they are being forced on something, but really kind of allowing them to make it something that they can take ownership of. And that way you can start building up your tiger teams or regional champions or all kinds of like these evangelists. And people tend to follow. It's the classic curve that you have the early adopters, but then once they tell others how fun they are having and how great their work life is, then others want it too. So there's that healthy envy building up, and that way it starts to transform. But if it's only like a siloed to a specific task force or something that is excluded from the organization as a whole, I think that will doom things to fail. But being very inclusive, that would be the approach that I would take.
Yeah, no, I think that's a really good point. I almost think one of the challenges with a lot of digital projects is they're kind of seen as digital projects rather than like business change initiatives. And I think, if they're driven out of a digital, a digital lead, head of BIM or, equivalent kind of role, that I don't always necessarily think that's a good thing. I think it's kind of good for someone in that role. And part of the skill of that role should be to sort of, curry favor with a group of people around you, and it's then a change is then seen as their change rather than a digital change, which I think is not a bad way to go. But Simon, I know you've had some experience with this as well, so that's a good good time to bring you in.
I think there's it's interesting, isn't it? Because if you were to approach it, and so I was just saying, there's kind of the top down versus the bottom up, and the top down, that authoritarian approach, where you just get told how to transform. We know that doesn't work in not only transformation, but in anything that's rolled out in the AEC sector particularly. It just can never happen. Whereas the bottom up kind of let organizations or individuals not so much fight it out, but organically develop it, is equally not going to ever work because it will take too long. And I think the classic example of something that happened at relative pace was Betamax versus VHS, and how ultimately one won and the other one didn't. Not saying that's directly an analogy for transformation, but it feels that if you want to get here at pace and you can't tell people what to do and you can't let them work it out for themselves, it's always going to be something in the middle of bringing that top-down authoritarian, that bottom-up Darwinian kind of to a level, and allowing that collaboration to happen across all tiers of the organization, acknowledging and recognizing that change throughout. So I very much agree.
Great. Okay. Well, that brings things. We've kind of done Q&A as we go through, but that's a nice, lovely slide, so I'll bring that up. But just finally, just thank you. You know, genuinely, Simon and Salla, I think this has been a really. I mean, these are topics which I'm definitely no expert on, but you've been able to communicate your points in a way which even I can understand. So for people who are who work in industry, I'm sure the event will have been really useful. There's been, I know we've got kind of audience members from around the world, so thank you for joining at your kind of different times. And yeah, we'll send a recording out, and I'm sure I'm sure you can sort of look at Simon and Salla on LinkedIn as well for any sort of further thoughts. So yeah, just thank you all for joining, and thank you particularly to Simon and Salla. Really appreciate your time.
Thank you, Jacob, and thank you, Simon. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, guys. Thanks a lot.